One of the most wanted creatures in the series, the dragon, went extinct between Game of Thrones and the prequel series, House of the Dragon. But how did they perish? Today we learn the initial cause of the dragon's disappearance and other fascinating show-related facts. First up, why are there only 3 dragons left in the series? The Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen civil war that will start in House of the Dragon Season 2, is the key reason why only 3 dragons are left in Game of Thrones. As predicted, when Aemon Targaryen's dragon Vhagar killed Eryx and Lucerys Balerion in Season 1 of House of the Dragon, the dragon riders of House Targaryen fight among themselves for the Iron Throne during the Dance of the Dragons in George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood novel. In a season that saw more than 100 deaths, Eryx was the only dragon to pass away, but he won't be the last. Every dragon in House of the Dragons is doomed, regardless of whether it was merely alluded to or was really seen on screen. Most of the terrible specifics of why only 3 dragons are left in Game of Thrones are revealed in Fire and Blood, which is largely accurate to the series. For those who have studied Martin's book on the history of the House Targaryen, the conflict between Aemon and Daemon Targaryen and their respective dragons, Vhagar and Caraxes, is probably the most eagerly anticipated dragon fight. The clash occurs in the God's Eye, the most critical site in ancient Westeros' history. Not only does everyone involved die in the conflict. Next up, why are Westeros dragons almost extinct? Most winged creatures were imprisoned in the dragon pit at King's Landing until and during the Dance of the Dragons. Even though it makes sense for the Targaryens to desire the house to them, given their tremendous power, keeping the dragons in cages slowed their growth, making each generation smaller, weaker, and less likely to survive. The last dragons, according to Tyrion Lannister, were no bigger than cats. This is primarily accurate for what is known as the very last dragon, known as Dragonbane, who perished in 153 AC during the reign of King Aegon III Targaryen. It also makes sense that there weren't enough dragons left for mating when one considers that so few dragons survived, and those that did live generally disappeared. But the reason why there are still only 3 dragons in Game of Thrones is still a mystery. It's challenging to think that the more vigorous dragons that the Targaryen rode in House of the Dragons just died out because they are formidable creatures with extraordinarily long lives. Next off, did Masters of the Citadel have anything to do with the dragon's extinction? The Masters of the Citadel's alleged attempts to extinguish magic from the realm may cause the dragon's extinction in Game of Thrones. In A Feast for Crows, the 4th book by George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, Archmaester Marwyn says to Samwell Tarly, "Who, in your opinion, was responsible for the last dragon massacre? Swords in the hands of violent dragon slayers? Glass lights, prophecy, or sorcery have no place in the world the Citadel is creating, let alone dragons." Although it hasn't been proven that the Maesters killed the dragons in Game of Thrones, it stands to reason that they would be averse to magic and fanciful animals, given their unwavering commitment to reason and logic. It is conceivable that the Maesters had a hand in how the dragons perished in Game of Thrones. Given how magic itself appeared to vanish from the realm, how few dragon eggs hatched after the dance, despite numerous tries, and how magic's return corresponded with that of the dragons, it is still being determined that the Maesters' precise methods would have been and how they would have known the locations of the remaining dragons in Game of Thrones. Still, they may have created a poison to severely stunt growth and/or prevent hatchlings, or even change the process of conception or egg fertilization in some other way. Next off, Kit Harington broke his leg. The cast and crew of Game of Thrones Season 3 had a unique challenge when Kit Harington, who plays Jon Snow, shattered his leg during filming. After being shut out, the actor tried to climb into his own locked London apartment. Naturally, he tripped and shattered his leg. The filming crew had to think of innovative ways to work around the injuries. They were primarily forced to use Jon Snow impersonators who wore similar clothes and wigs. Next up, there's an unaired Game of Thrones pilot. Tom McCarthy, the writer-director of Spotlight, had to reshoot the first pilot because it was so horrible. Show co-creator David Benioff told Variety, "We got everything wrong with the writing of it on a fundamental level. Among the main issues, none of the individuals he and Weiss invited knew that Jaime and Cersei were siblings, which is a crucial story aspect we inexplicably forgot to establish. A copy of the original script was discovered in 2019 with a lot of intriguing information." Next off, the Stark kids were of different ages in the show than in the books. The Stark children are much younger in the book A Game of Thrones than in the television television series. Bran was supposed to be 7 years old, but Isaac Hapstead, Wright, the actor who played him, was 12. Arya, played by Maisie Williams, who went from 9 to 13, Sansa, Sophie Turner, who went from 11 to 15, Rickon, Art Parkinson, who went from 3 to 6. The most glaring change would have been that Robb Stark, Richard Madden, and Jon Snow, Kit Harington, would have been 15 and 14 years old. However, only if Game of Thrones had strictly adhered to its source material. Next up, George R.R. Martin had a cameo in the original episode. In the original pilot, George R.R. Martin appeared as a guest during Daenerys and Khal Drogo's wedding. The scene had to be cut when Daenerys' character was recast. Later, Martin pushed for a less glamorous but more enduring role, a severed head on a spike. Martin, however, asserts that those chopped skulls are pricey. Therefore, until I supply my own, I'm not eligible to be a severed head. Martin was given a chance to make a cameo appearance in Season 8 by Benioff and Weiss, but he was too busy with The Winds of Winter to have the time. Next up, there were a bunch of other casting close calls on Game of Thrones. Not only Elle and Merchant might have been in Game of Thrones. Dominic West of The Wire and Gillian Anderson of the show both declined an unnamed part. It was probably Mance Rayder. The character eventually went to Syrian Hines. According to West, the part would have required filming in Reykjavik for 6 months. Sam Claflin, of the Hunger Games trilogy, tried out for Jon Snow and Viserys Targaryen roles. Sam Heughan of the Outlander series tried out 7 times for various roles, including Renly Baratheon and Loras Tyrell. Jared Harris, a Mad Men star, and Mahershala Ali, an Oscar winner, reportedly also applied for roles in the program. Next off, Arya Stark was the hardest character to cast. Benioff stated at South by Southwest in 2017, "I recall we probably looked at 300 girls in England and could not find the right Arya. We were unable to cast her. They came across Maisie Williams while browsing audition videos in a Moroccan hotel lobby with poor Wi-Fi. They chose her video based on a small yet promising thumbnail." Benioff remarked, "There was simply something about that small thumbnail face that just seemed right. She appeared to be around 7. She appeared to be 12, but was actually 7. Next up, Peter Dinklage almost turned down the role of Tyrion Lannister. In a Reddit AMA, Peter Dinklage explained why he wasn't initially smitten with Game of Thrones. Because of the fantasy nature, Dinklage admitted, "I had one hesitation. I told showrunner David Benioff I didn't want a particularly long beard and pointy shoes. I was reassured by Benioff and D.B. Weiss that this character and this environment weren't like that. I agreed after hearing about his complexity and the fact that he wasn't a hero or a villain, that he was a womanizer and a drinker. After seeing a picture of him, that was both imperfect and beautiful." Next, Kit Harington showed up to his audition with a black eye. Kit Harington and the woman he was dating wound up in a McDonald's late one night before his Game of Thrones audition. They sat at a table with a couple they didn't know because it was packed. Soon after, the man across from them started insulting Harington's date. Unfortunately, Harington didn't realize how tall the man was until he got to his feet and challenged him. Harington admits, "I got beaten and ended up with a fresh shiner." On the plus side, he believes his scarred face contributed to his getting the part. "I believe the person who punched me in the face may have aided in my employment." Next off, David Benioff pranked Peter Dinklage. David Benioff played a practical joke on Peter Dinklage by phoning him and telling him the show had been canceled after the pilot was picked up. Benioff guessed that happened when the pilot was picked up. Tom McCarthy and I called him from a Yankees game while we were together. Dinklage had to wait 6 hours before finding out the truth. Dinklage revealed in a guest appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live that he enjoyed pulling practical jokes on the set. "I enjoy making up that I'm dead. Always enjoyable," said Dinklage. "In the trailer, all that was left were my legs. You must arrange yourself in an awkward stance while being really pressed against the ground." He claimed he would keep looking for hours. Next up, the show's nudity wasn't easy for Emilia Clarke. Even though Clarke's portrayal of Daenerys Targaryen transformed her career, the actress said her first few days on set weren't always pleasant. She fell off of a horse in front of the crew on the first day of filming, embarrassed herself, and cried. There was also the necessary nudity for her character and the famed scene. Regarding shooting the first season, she admitted to Esquire that, "Once I had to take a little time out. I cried a little bit, stated I needed a cup of tea, and got ready for the following scene." It can be hard to wrap up why they gradually started removing dragons from the show, but we have a fair amount of guesses. Other than these dragons, some of these facts were good to know. Why do you think they removed dragons from the show? Which fact do you think was the most shocking? Make sure you let us know your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching.